Welcome to this evening's session. We hope to learn a lot about the state of statistics in Africa, and that is coming to us from a very exciting and very rich book by Professor Morten Jerven.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. I should start out by thanking particularly ASSD for the invitation, the wider African statistical community, and also personally Paddy Leola for his personal invitation to come here to engage with you today. I'm very grateful and I'm humbled by the expertise present at this panel here today. And it's, so thank you very much for allowing me to come here and present my basic contribution to the debate on future of African development statistics. I would start out by making a few very basic but crucial remarks. First of all, when we talk about the Africa statistics narrative, as it's been phrased here today, whether we call it Africa's statistical tragedy, a statistical renaissance, or talk about a challenge of poor numbers, whether of these headlines you're most comfortable with, I think the audience is very keenly aware of the fact that Africa is not a country. So that it is pretty clear that when we are talking about a grand narrative here, we are going to make average statements on trends and levels which will inadvertently pay undeserved compliments to some countries who are doing worse than the average, and perhaps also, unfortunately, deliver unwarranted insults to others. It is at the very heart of this debate that statistical capacity today is very, very unevenly distributed at the continent. And I think that's worthwhile putting forward there and not fall into the generalization trap, as it is often called. Moreover, I should also say that the audience of this book was first and foremost a book that is talking about economic statistics, and particularly on GDP, and particularly for a scholarly community. So particularly for maybe the broader development community, and therefore I'm very pleased to be addressing the African statistical community as well. But I should say that a lot of things which I'm stressing in the book is perhaps things that are sometimes known in detail by many of the people in the audience. What I'm offering is the general picture and ways about how we can see upon this in a larger historical frame as well. And then I would also like to say that it's a final acknowledgement which takes us further to the core of the debate, is that the term Africa's statistical tragedy was not coined by me. That was coined by Shanta Dravarjan, the then chief economist of the World Bank, though inspired by some of the research paper I'd written in advance to it. And I think that many here would point out to call what is currently going on in the continent a statistical tragedy would be quite misleading. It's also ahistorical, which Ben later on I think also will support me on, that what I do in poor numbers is that I tend to agree that there were impressive gains made by newly independent nations in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, while I call the 1980s and 1990s the lost decades. Now, whether I think the kind of current move is amounting to a statistical renaissance it's maybe something I think it's perhaps a too early date to factually state the rebirth. I do think that Renaissance, the term Renaissance, makes us think about that there has been a golden age, that there has been a dark age, but I don't subscribe to a cyclical kind of view of history. I think there are new and very particular challenges today, which I will talk about. But before that, I'll just stress that I'm not here to lecture on anyone's states of affairs in anyone's statistical office here in the audience. My intent with the book, Poor Numbers, was to raise awareness to an issue previously neglected, particularly in development debates, And I think, you know, without blowing my own trumpet, I think the book has done that with some kind of success. Bill Gates now discusses national accounts. That is quite a contribution. And he thinks that it's time to invest more in African statistical offices. The Financial Times talks about the neglect of statistical offices vis-a-vis central banks in the region, and thinks about moves, political important moves towards independence of statistical offices. So I think we are at a very, very crucial point in history, and I think that's where I would like to make my contribution. And if I have anything to offer to statisticians in this room, it is that I've tried to connect the dots between data users and data producers in development, and I hope to give bigger space to data producers in these coming development debates. My book, it's also worthwhile emphasizing, is then based on as you said, field research in Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Nigeria, Uganda, and Malawi, and I also have an email survey, which has then made for the book Poor Numbers, How We're Misled by African Development Statistics and What to Do About It. The book has an introduction and a conclusion, but it also has 4 chapters. What do I do in this book? First, I stress, and which I will help you to do today as well, to stress what I call a knowledge problem, where my emphasis is on that we do know much less than we would like to know about income and growth in Africa. This has direct relevance for instance, debates on whether Africa is rising is for real and by what rate and who's rising and who's not. And that's why the Financial Times and others are suddenly so keenly interested in these growth metrics. I also then offer a kind of a very short, broad-brushed history of the historical development statistical capacity before I talk about what to do about it. And I'll try to follow that roughly, that outline today. Of course, I do also have some copies of the book with me here today if you want to read the whole book, but at least here now I'll try to give you a flavor. So the first thing I try to say is that there is a knowledge problem. And I think very widely publicized, that's been you know, very clearly shown what type of knowledge problem we're having. You know, many have known that in 2010, the Ghana Statistical Services announced a GDP rebasing, rebasing to the extent that GDP levels almost doubled. And many knows as well that Nigeria is currently undergoing work on trying to rebase their economy. Their benchmark year for GDP calculations is currently 1990, so we are slowly approaching a quarter of a century since we had a reasonable picture of what is probably the largest economy of sub-Saharan Africa. That means that GDP of these countries is underestimated and so forth. That's some good news. But there is some bad news about, and I think particularly this relates to what I think is the knowledge problem. It's not that it's not known at the statistical office level, but rather it's been sorely neglected how data is produced in the development debates. And the kind of reactions that we got to these kind of changes, you know, that Todd Moss at the Center of Global Development says, boy, we really don't know anything, where for instance, UNDP contested this rebasing and said it was a statistical illusion, whereas Shanta Drivajan declared suddenly that, you know, the tragedy is that we didn't know how much we didn't know, and therefore declared Africa's statistical tragedy.